This is Tim, and today I'm going to talk about wandering monsters, wandering monster tables, and wilderness tables for random encounters. So first off, you might be asking, what is a wandering monster? Or you might be saying, I can't believe he's talking about that. So depending on your reaction, um, I'm sure your comments below will represent that. So wandering monsters are random monster encounters that happen usually in a dungeon. Sometimes they happen in a wilderness, as I just talked about. So wandering monsters are usually, it's like some random roll, maybe like a 1 on a 1d6, or there's a 30% chance. Depending on what system you play, there's different percentages to see if they actually happen. They're usually locked in with time. After so much time elapses, then you roll on the chart, or you roll to see if there is a wandering monster, and then you roll on the chart to see what happens. And I've heard a lot of people talk about how wandering monsters are a terrible idea, that it's a waste of time, it's a combat encounter that has no meaning, these sorts of things. And those are all legitimate opinions, and there's reasons behind them all. But my opinion of them, especially in dungeon crawl kind of campaigns, fantasy games in general, where there's more dungeons than not, they can be a good tool. They can be something that represents the danger of the dungeon. They can be something that the GM didn't plan, and it's a nice surprise for the GM. I really like using dice to bring things out of the table that you didn't have planned, something that's slightly different. And there's a siren in the background if you can hear it. But so you make a random roll to see if this encounter happens every so often, especially if you're like a dungeon game, a mega dungeon campaign where it's location based usually. And then you see what you roll on the chart and see what random encounter comes out. Like I said, what's nice about having a random encounter, random monster, wandering monster table, is it is a very succinct way to describe each level of the dungeon, or perhaps different sections of the dungeon. You could have wandering monster tables for, maybe you have 5 of them for one level. If there's different sections, maybe there's like a mushroom forest in one area that you have a different table for. There's a higher percentage chance for rolling, certain types of monsters. But what it is it's almost like a snapshot. It's a summary. It's a Cliff Notes version of that section of the dungeon. So in very few words, and represented in table, you can look at that and it should tell you something about that dungeon, that level of the dungeon. It's a very, like I said, succinct way of just telling the GM, this is what this level's like, these are the kinds of monsters that live here, these are the things that should have some sort of relationship, perhaps, like for instance, in my Darv's Hill Mega Dungeon, on one level of the dungeon, I believe it was the 3rd or 4th level down, there were different sections of the dungeon. There were like a dark elf section, goblin section, dark dwarf section, minotaurs, and I believe that was all the different factions. And I had it all laid out with a map, different color coded sections, and I did have random encounters in each of those areas. And another thing that people forget too is in a lot of these campaigns, especially a lot of older Mega Dungeon campaigns, is that there's lots of open space, and that exploration is a theme that was very prevalent. There was many empty rooms that had strange things in them, so wandering monster tables kind of filled in some of that empty space, especially if you took a long time to look around, explore, check for traps, check for secret doors, that sort of thing. And a lot of the older games had this amount of time for checking the trap, or this amount of time for doing that. And GM is supposed to keep track of that. Keeping track of time is kind of tough. I sometimes fall by the wayside when I do that myself. But I guess my main point is that these tables, especially in a dungeon, is just a very quick way to tell the GM what that level's about, the main themes of it, the things that reside there, and it should be a jumping off point for you to come up with reasons why those creatures are there. Maybe they have some relationship, they trade, they have an alliance with, maybe they hate their guts. Maybe there's a war going on between them. Those sorts of things. Now with wilderness encounter tables, it's kind of the same thing. I think many games had, you know, I don't know if you necessarily rolled for a random encounter, but it was okay if you're looking for an encounter in the wilderness. If they're traveling, maybe every so many days, you're going to roll on this wilderness encounter table to see if something comes out of the blue. And it's the same thing. It's a very succinct way of telling you what kind of natural creatures reside there, what kind of monsters, and again, it's a good starting point. It's a good place to think, okay, these creatures are out there. What are they up to? Why are they there? And especially if you're world building, you could, as a world builder, have different sections of your setting, and you could have a small table for each area, and that might be the first thing you world build there. Perhaps you think, what races are there? What monsters are there? How do they interrelate with each other? Or maybe you don't. Maybe you just think, okay, here's a bunch of random monsters. I'm trying to flesh out the whole setting. That's enough for now, and you move on to another section. And then later you come back and you think, oh yeah, that's right. There's different types of creatures here. I wonder how they get along together. I wonder where they live. And it's a good way to start world building, or a good way to just have random encounters. So I'm going to address random encounters and how people think they're useless, pointless, waste of time. It's just an extra combat that, especially if you're a player that doesn't like combat at all, they're kind of pointless. Depending on, like all of our advice, it depends on the group that you're in. But I think they have a place. Maybe maybe in your game you don't roll them so often. Maybe instead of every 10 minutes or every hour, you roll them every 3 hours or 4 hours in game time. Mix and match and do what you want with the rules. I don't know. I just think that they get a bad rap. I mean, they can be used too often, perhaps, in certain campaigns, and again, that's where communication comes with your group. If you're in a group that has too many random encounters, or if there's too much combat, or you're just not having fun, make sure you talk to your GM, and hopefully they'll adjust the way they run their game accordingly. But for me, I think I'm going to title this Wandering Monsters Aren't the Devil, or Wandering Monster Tables Aren't the Devil, just because it's another tool that you can use, and you can use it in your own way. You don't have to do it by the book. You can mess with it, adjust it, and I suggest people making their own Wandering Monster Tables. Even in modules that have listed monster tables, you could add to it, maybe if you have like a D30, you could just make 30 section monster tables just to give more variety. And again, I think something gets lost, that GMs know everything, there's no surprises. There's probably one more thing I want to talk about too. Reaction tables. This was more in like the basic and expert D&D. I think they had this in AD&D in 2nd edition too, where it was like a reaction of the monster to bumping into your adventuring group. And if you had a high charisma, that would modify the results somewhat. But the idea is that the GM has no idea how that group of monsters is going to react to the PCs. There were some monsters that said, they're always going to kill whoever bumps into them. But there's a lot of other monsters that don't say that. So, you can get up there, roll a reaction check, and maybe you roll that they're friendly. And this makes the GM kind of think on their feet a little bit. Why would this monster be friendly towards a group of adventurers? And you have to come up with why. Maybe they have someone they want to take out, someone that they hate even more than this bunch of strangers that have barged into their domain. And I think it's something that really could be used in any system. Just a little 2d6 chart, 1 to 12. Or I guess it would be it would be 2 to 12. And there's different reactions, different layers of how they react to things. They run away, or they fight instantly on site, that sort of thing. But it can surprise the GM. It gives the GM something new, something exciting at the table, because before you roll that, you really have no idea how they're going to react. But then again, there's also the segment of the gamer population out there that says, I don't want to leave it up to chance. I would rather just have that planned out ahead of time. And It's just a tool that you can use or discard. It's really up to you. So I guess in closing, Wandering Monsters can be a good tool. They can be used to make your game more interesting. My phone's ringing. And that they're not always a bad thing. They get a bad reputation, I think, sometimes. So that's me signing off for now, and thanks for watching.